Hello and welcome to Let's Connect Episode 5, your guide to what's new in the virtual event technology space and tips to improve your events. My name's Lee Diener and I'm the president of Leading Edge Training Solutions. And we're going to go through a number of different updates that have happened, but then also talk about some more tips when it comes to virtual presence, particularly the audio section of virtual presence. And for that, I'm going to have Harry Snodgrass, our director of operations, join me because prior to coming to Leading Edge Training Solutions, he was an Emmy Award-winning sound designer and audio engineer in Hollywood. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about microphones, audio settings, and your environment to help improve your virtual presence from an audio perspective. So let's jump right in. This month for Zoom, we're going to focus in on Zoom webinars. As I'm sure everybody has noticed over the last year, Zoom has made a lot of updates to their webinars. We've been able to do a lot more in the way of customizability with some wallpapers and backgrounds, customizing some name tags, among a lot of other things. One of those areas that we've been able to customize is the waiting room itself. What people see when they first come into a session if the webinar hasn't started yet. And the area that I'm going to focus in on particularly are those recurring webinars that you may run. If you run a monthly series, a weekly series, whatever it may be, after somebody is done, if they click on the link again, or they click on the link a couple days before, in the past, they would just see that it was a recurring webinar, but not when the webinar was going to happen. Now, they're going to see what the date of the next webinar is, as well as what time the webinar is running. So your participants then, when they're in the waiting room, one, are going to be able to feel comfortable that they're in the right place and have the right link. But second, they're going to be able to see exactly what time the webinar starts. And if it's not the same day, they'll be able to see what day the webinar starts as well. While we're on the topic of Zoom webinars, I did want to touch on one question we've been getting a lot lately. And that is, what's the difference between a practice session and the backstage? It is a setting that you need to select when you're scheduling your webinar. Now, I'm going to take you to an in-person event and give you a little analogy. The practice session is when the doors are closed to the ballroom for the general session. Nobody can come in and they're inside practicing and talking about what the event's going to look like. Whereas the backstage is the green room. Everybody's in the ballroom. They're getting ready for everything to start. And all of the speakers and presenters are in a separate room in the green room in the back waiting to come on stage. The nice thing about the backstage is the backstage stays open the entire session. So if somebody comes in late, they can test their mic, they can test their screen share, and then the producer will move them onto the main stage. And other speakers can come from the main stage and move back into the backstage again. Whereas with a practice session, you can only use it at the beginning of the webinar before you start the webinar. Once you start the webinar, then everybody can see and hear what you're doing. And at that point, the practice session is closed. So hopefully that helps on the difference between the two. There are definitely places to use both of them, but we go back and forth depending on the event and what's going on. The place where the backstage really helps is for those people that come in frequently late and you still need to test their mic, their camera, and those types of things. MS Teams has made some improvements to its Q&A feature. Before we talk about what those enhancements are, I do want to set the stage a little bit on when we would recommend using the Q&A feature. If you do have external participants or guests coming in to join your sessions, we wouldn't recommend using the Q&A feature because those guests can't see the Q&A feature unless they're properly invited and signed in. And a lot of times, as much as we try, they just don't come in the right way. They do have access to the chat, though, so you can use chat instead. For an organizational event where it's okay for participants to be asking the questions and others to see it, some of these features are great, and we do recommend using the Q&A feature in this area. So there are three major enhancements that happened this month with the Q&A feature. First, The presenters can moderate the Q&A and they can publish the questions. For the participants, since they can see the questions, they can upvote the questions, which means you can quickly be able to see what the most important questions are that need to be answered. And finally, the moderators are able to filter those questions so that your upvoted questions can move to the top and your answered and older questions can be moved to the bottom so that you are answering the most relevant questions during a session. Now, the Q&A feature isn't a major groundbreaking enhancement or adjustment, but it really will help to make your events a little more effective to make sure you're answering the questions that most of your participants have. So give it a try and let us know how it works for you. Now that we've talked about the updates to the platforms for this month, let's continue our discussion on virtual presence that we've been having for the last couple of months. This month, we're going to focus in on audio. And for that, I couldn't think of a better person to bring in than our Director of Operations, Harry Snodgrass, who has a lot of experience in audio engineering and sound design. First off, I wanted to ask for your thoughts on microphones. Our computers have them integrated. Is that microphone good enough? And if not, do you have any that you would recommend?
In a pinch, you can use that microphone that's in the computer. In general, though, it's going to not sound as good as using an external microphone because basically the computer's a little further away from you, and that microphone is designed to pick up a wider pattern, so you'll get a lot more room noise. It'll sound more echoey and more hollow. Using external mic, we recommend using USB mics. A USB microphone can plug right into your computer, and basically it's going to have much better audio quality than the internal microphone. It's a price range between maybe $50 and $250. You'll end up getting a very good microphone. The one I'm using right now is a Rode XCM50, and that is about $150. I have it in front of me about an arm's length away, pointing up at my face, which basically gives us the best sound quality we can get. And then in a lower price range for when you're traveling, we have another one we recommend, which is a Samsung mic. It's a nice small portable mic, and that one can easily fold up, go in your bag, get back out, hook in via USB, and do what you need to do. And again, put it in the same distance as you would be with the other mic.
Thanks for those recommendations, Harry. I'm actually using a Rode USB mini microphone as we record here now.
And that's another one I would recommend. That kind of sits in the middle of the price range between the two I recommended earlier.
Okay, great. Well, to that end, a lot of times I have ended up just hooking up my Rode USB mini, logging right into the session, unmute, and go. But I know that there are a number of different settings that you can adjust within the platforms themselves. What do you recommend that we do before an event when it comes to those settings?
The first thing I would recommend is test your microphone, make sure it's working, make sure it's selected in the microphone selection option within the application you're using. They all have that option. And then also within those applications, you can test it by recording a little piece of it, listening to it back to make sure you sound good. And then the second thing I would recommend is there's some settings that are usually automatically picked or selected in the applications, but not always. So I recommend going in, checking that the automatic volume control is set for the microphone. Basically, it's usually called automatic volume for most of the platforms. And then that will control your voice level so you don't get too loud or too soft if you start speaking loudly or too softly. And then the next one would be background noise removal. Also, again, in most platforms, if not all, and that is usually selected by default, but not always. And generally, if they have that option, it's going to be some settings within it, maybe not. So you just kind of stick with, if there's settings within it, stick with the auto setting or whatever the default one is. And then lastly, I would just recommend basically making sure you're not muted when you come into the session. Most platforms, unless the person selects it differently who set up the call, you're going to come in muted. And a lot of people start talking, their lips start going, and I don't know how many times you tell people you're muted. So just check that little icon, make sure you're unmuted when you're ready to talk.
Yeah, I'm going on 15 years, and I still have people telling me to make sure that I'm unmuted at times when we get into sessions.
I do the same. Exactly. Yep.
So now we have our microphone that we've picked out. We've got the audio settings in the platform taken care of. Let's talk about our environment. Is there anything that we can do where we are presenting from that can really help with that audio, with those audio levels, and making sure that we sound our best in the events that we're doing.
Very important that you're in a good place to be on camera and record audio or just be in a session. Basically, you want to try to be in a smaller room if possible. And the best smaller room would be a room that has maybe curtains near a window, a rug or carpet, furniture maybe next to you that's not necessarily on camera, but some nice soft furniture. Those items will absorb some of the reverberations and some of the echoes that would happen in any space with a microphone. So they'll kind of deaden the sound some to make it sound a lot better. And that's generally the main thing to look at. And also just try not to be in a loud environment. Try not to be in an environment where there's a lot of background noise. So if you're in your home doing it, try to find a part of the house that's a quieter part of the house, so you're not fighting background noise.
Great. Yeah, that's always a difficult one, especially when we travel as well. But to that end, making sure that you have the right environment that is conducive to you presenting on an event is incredibly important. And thanks a lot for those recommendations, Harry. It's a great starting point for people to improve their virtual presence from an audio perspective. I know we can dig deeper into those questions. So, would you mind coming back to do some videos on each one of those questions as well?
No, I'd love to come back. There's a lot more settings that we can go into within all the platforms to really hone in the quality of the microphone and make it almost sound like a professional studio microphone. And then on top of that, there's a lot of things we could dig into with microphones themselves, and basically talk about other audio issues that may come up.
Great. Well, keep an eye out on our LinkedIn as well as YouTube for those videos to come in the future. And if you do have any questions or you have any thoughts that you want to add into the chat, please do so that we can make sure that we focus in on those while we're doing the videos as well. And that's a wrap for Let's Connect episode 5. We really appreciate you tuning in. Please take a moment and let us know some of your thoughts on these updates that we've talked about and how you've implemented some of the virtual presence tips that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks. Now, here at Leading Edge Training Solutions, we want to make sure that you have the best virtual event possible based on the objectives of your session. Hopefully, some of what we've talked about in Let's Connect episodes will help you with that. But if you need more help, please feel free to reach out, and we look forward to seeing you next time.